Beautiful. So, folks, it's good to be together. It's good to be together, those of us who are here. It's good to be together, those of us who are with us live on screen. And it's particularly good to say hi to those who might watch this later. They have a benefit that you don't have. They can watch it at double speed. I hear you say, hooray, hooray, Psalm 3. Only 147 to go. Isn't it exciting? Well, the Psalms are a pretty exciting place, and I'm not sure we're going to deal with them all in this series, but dipping in and out allows us to see all sorts of, hopefully, useful lessons that have proved useful and practical in the past, and hopefully are good for us. So thank you, Sam, for beginning the series for us, opening up Psalm 1, and Psalm 1 gives us that big picture of blessed are those who are faithful to God, and those who aren't, their life's a struggle. So it sets up those sort of two ways of approaching life. And then last week, Sam opened up Psalm 2, which brings it down to the level of the nations, and asking the question of what happens when nations walk in the ways of good or of evil. And in Psalm 3, we're entering what I'm seeing as something like a bit of a landing strip, where those big ideas come into land. And they come into land in human level experience, asking about big questions such as, where is God in affliction? Where's God in the midst of difficulty or distress or anguish or fear or weeping or anger? Later Psalms, by the way, ask where is God in the midst of joy and delight and dancing and worship, but that's not this section. This section is unashamed in dealing with the big, tough questions. So in the next 2 hours or so, we'll cover the key topics. Of course, you know I'm joking. There's no way in the world we can cover this in under 2 hours, so we'll see how we go. So how are we going to manage these 8 verses of Psalm 3? Well, first up, let me note a couple of things about the psalm. The first one is that it's one of the psalms that doesn't appear in regular Sunday readings in our lectionary. So it's entirely possible that this is the first time you've heard Psalm 3 read in church in this sort of a way. Does that make you feel warm and excited? It's just interesting, isn't it? That we say all scripture's inspired and useful, but sometimes we need to go exploring those scriptures, and we've had this one presented to us today. Secondly, it's the first of the Psalms with a title. The title tells us that the events in David's life, the king, have shaped this, and particularly his flight from Absalom, his son, who was trying to take over the kingdom. You can find that story in 2 Samuel, chapters 15 to 18, if you are interested in having a look at that. So Absalom had subverted David's proper position as king. He took the affection of the people, he became super popular, he made himself friends with all of those who are rich and powerful. There are parallel stories like this all over the world in all times. And his aim, of course, was to become so popular that people would follow him before his due time to be king, rather than the rightful king, his father. So turn to the text if you haven't already memorised the whole of the scriptures. Excellent. And I think the page numbers, if you'd like to look at it on paper, are there. If you've got your multiple set of Bibles like I carry around on my phone, then pull that out. Just a little story on that, by the way. When I retired and was no longer entitled to a licence for my previous position and needed a permission to officiate, I had to swear on the Bible, a set of oaths which clergy are required to do. And the only time we could do this and arrange it with Bishop Paul was when Wendy and I were travelling back in the motorhome from Sydney. So we're on the Hume Highway, And I had to use my phone and show him the thing as I signed it, so that was fine, we did that. He said, "Now you need to swear on the Bible." I said, "Well, I'm holding it." He said, "I can't see it." I said, "Well, Paul, I'm living in a motorhome. I don't carry books. Everything is electronic." And so I think I was the first of the clergy to swear my oath on the Bible in this form. So that's good. It's good. It works. And it's useful to have it available, is it not? All the time. So that's useful. If you're interested in talking about that sort of stuff, let me know. So you've now got Psalm 3 open. And I want to just work through it, looking at it in terms of David's life. So let me read the very first part. A psalm of David when he fled from his son Absalom. The words that follow are the words of a deeply unhappy person. Effectively, he starts off saying, "Everyone is against me. Everyone is against me." Verse 1, "Lord, how many are my foes? How many rise up against me?" Now, this David is a person with many enemies. It's not surprising that a king will have enemies in other nations. But David also had enemies within his own nation, within the many tribes that held together the nation in some sort of fragmented array. Worse than that, he had friends who had openly become enemies, and some who had covertly become enemies. And toughest of all, in the midst of this, was the fact that his son was seeking to usurp the throne. His closest and dearest and most trusted had become his enemies. No wonder that he feels everyone is against me. How many are my foes? It hurt to have enemies. It hurts, and it hurt to hear what they were saying of him. Verse 2, God will not deliver him. Well, now that is a punch in the theological solar plexus. To not just have enemies, but to have enemies who say that not even God is going to help you. That is horrendous. Not only every human one is against me, but even God may be against me. The 19th century Baptist preacher in London, Charles Haddon Spurgeon, said of this verse, "If all of the trials which come from heaven, all the temptations which ascend from hell, and all the crosses which arise from the earth could be mixed and pressed together, they would not make a trial so terrible as that which is contained in this verse. It is the most bitter of all afflictions to be led to fear that there is no help for us in God." Which is a long way of saying it was a rotten blow. How horrendous is that thought that God, even God, is against us? The psalm turns to look to God in the presence of this opposition. So see verse 3. "But you, Lord, are a shield around me, my glory and the one who lifts my head high." Now, I don't know about you, but that reminds me of a children's talk I heard once about the shield. And thank you, Sam, for that. That was dramatic. I'm starting to feel more fear, by the way, about next week. Who's going to do the kids' talk? Because I'm behind. No, it wasn't in the contract. Anyway, we'll see how we go, won't we? Hey. So, a shield. What a powerful image. And thanks, Sam, for that image that we might have our own little shields, but God provides that tremendous protection. It's a wonderful thing to read of this depiction of David reflecting that he is not only the shield, but the one who lifts his head high in the midst of this affliction. Holding one's head high against one's enemies is truly a bold move. some of you will be aware of the work of Viktor Frankl, the founder of a movement in psychology called logotherapy, famous for his book written, his reflections on his life in the concentration camp called Man's Search for Meaning. And Frankl said that meaning is what we are all about making in our human lives, whether we kind of realise it or not. But he also made this great comment as he looked at the deprivation of the concentration camp. He said, many freedoms can be taken away from human beings, but there is one freedom which can never be taken away, and that is how we react to our circumstances. So in affliction, are we going to be bowed down, or will we lift our head high? Frankl saw that many of those who were able to lift their head high, to retain hope, to care for others, even to laugh in the midst of the worst of things, survived longer and were able to impact the life of the camp in a way that was surprisingly constructive. So it is a remarkable thing to use one's freedom to choose how one reacts to the circumstances. Holding one's head high stands out, doesn't it? It's worth noting, however, that in the 2 Samuel passages that I referenced, where this story is told, David's head is constantly bowed down. A number of times in the text it talks about David's head bowed down, bowed low by his enemies, where he feels oppressed and opposed at every step. So we have to make some sense of interpreting this verse. And I want to suggest that what's going on here is what many philosophers have pointed to, and that is that life has to be lived forward. It's the only way to live life. But the only way we can understand our lives is to reflect on them in reverse. Do we make understanding by reflecting, as it were, backwards? And it's only in hindsight that the psalmist sees God present with David, even at the lowest point. And what a great image it is. And a great image in verse 4, where the psalmist calls out to God and hears his answer from his holy mountain. I called out to the Lord, and he answered me from his holy mountain. Now that is a remarkable turnabout for a person who'd been on the run, to be able to reinterpret the whole drama in the light of God's presence. And what a response! In trust, in hope. What's the situation? Well, everybody was still against him. They still were. Even when you tell the story in hindsight, they were still against him. But nevertheless, he says, verse 5, I will lie down and sleep. I wake again because the Lord sustains me. And what a gift sleep is. It's often only appreciated by those who've suffered the long-term lack of it. The poor insomniacs amongst us, those whose life cycles and rhythms just don't work in the society we're in. Coleridge's Ancient Mariner, sleep deprived for ages, has it this way: "Oh, sleep, it is a gentle thing, beloved from pole to pole. To Mary, Queen, the praise be given. She sent the gentle sleep from heaven that slid into my soul." What a gift. And when you're in that space where everyone is against me, everyone's against me. Everyone's against me. Sleep is a remarkable and blessed gift. It's a pathway to trust and to a changed attitude. So verse 6, I will not fear, though tens of thousands assail me on every side. Well, this is a reflection from a later vantage point. And now, arise, Lord, deliver me, strike all my enemies on the jaw, break the teeth of the wicked. I have a bit of problem with that verse. And unfortunately, to be able to really deal with those issues well, I think we need another 3 hours. Now, all those quickly in favour, show of hands. Okay, that's fine. We'll do it next Sunday. Okay, terrific. But the reality is we've all felt that way, haven't we? There's an honesty in this feeling. I think there's a great danger in simply applying, oh, God is my shield, everything's okay, if we don't also deal with this verse. And there are times when I feel like smacking everybody in the mouth. I really do. Even though I know God is with me, I've still got to deal with this reality. The pain is still enormous. But the psalm helps us because we see someone else living this reaction, this challenge, this affliction. For the moment, we simply note that God is the centre now of David's trust, that he sees deliverance as a possibility. It seems like something which was impossible is now, at least in hindsight, possible. And you'll be pleased to know that we come to verse 8, the last verse. May your blessing be on all people, because from the Lord comes deliverance. So this is a king who sees that his own journey of deliverance, reflected on in hindsight, is now the one who can be the source of blessing and deliverance for his own people. It's not insignificant. Now, you might think it's very exciting. We just got to verse 8. It's possible that I've only just begun. Let's talk about David. In recent years, there's been 2 poles of conversation around the role of David in the Psalms. About half the Psalms are attributed to David, and some would say that he actually wrote them, as it were, not with pen and paper, but with the equipment of his day, and people memorised them and they passed them on. And that's entirely possible. But another group would say, no, never did, never touched the paper, never played the lyre. People have written these things, and as was the tradition in the day, have attributed them to the Great One. That was certainly the tradition in the day. And I suspect that neither of those poles is correct. I suspect that this is really a reflection from David, but it's been mediated by many people. This is the stuff that's been lived out, and people have reflected on it and found immense value in this story. So David serves as a figure in history whose life helps us understand our lives, but also as a sort of channel in the tradition of wisdom, helping us to find ways to think about our lives and to allow the Psalms to become lessons for us today. A number of colleges over the years have employed me as a systematic theologian, a teacher of theology from that perspective. What is a systematic theologian? I don't hear anyone asking, but I'll answer the question anyway. Most of them have kindly also allowed me to teach biblical studies and history and sometimes even practical theology, just not the theology of shaving, though there is a book on it. Systematic theology takes the work of the Bible scholars and asks, if this is where the text comes from and how it was understood in its day, what does that mean for how we read it today? And systematic theologians also look at the history of interpretation. How has this text been understood in different times and places? Hence my interest in how Spurgeon used it in his preaching, because it seems to me that God doesn't suddenly change what the scriptures mean, but helps us build on the shoulders of those who've gone before. Systematic theology also draws from philosophy, where we share a great deal, a curiosity, a concern, a passion even, for understanding the big issues of life and death and evil and love and joy and hope. And it also contributes to practical theology, which is what we're doing now, which is the question of what does this mean for us? How does it change the way we live? That's where I want us to try and land. But it's a pretty tricky thing to do. Having spent some time thinking about David's story, the challenge then becomes, what are the lessons from this that help us make sense of our story? Think about your own situation. Think about the time when you were king in Israel. Oh, right, that may not work, eh? So we've got to move a little bit beyond the particulars. Okay, think of a time when you said either loudly or softly, everyone is against me. Nobody gets me. Everybody is against me. Where you were so undermined in your sense of self, when it seemed like nobody cared, that nobody thought you were worth paying attention to. When you either felt or perhaps were told, well, buddy, you're on your own. Everyone is against me. And maybe in that time, you even thought, even God's not here. God doesn't seem to give a fig about what's going on in my life. It's pretty horrendous. And I think the psalm helps us go, that's pretty normal stuff. But the fact that it's normal doesn't make it easy. One of the big dangers for systematic theologians is we like thinking about the big ideas. And it's sometimes difficult just to land them in the particulars. This was brought home to me this last week when I was meeting with two scholars and we were doing a bit of work on loving kindness and just asking, not what is loving kindness, but what instances have we seen? And I confess that when I was asked the questions for the podcast, I kept answering in terms of the big answers, in terms of what it's like thinking about kindness in the list of fruit of the Spirit in Galatians and how it follows on. And it took me ages to get to the particulars. And my friend who was interviewing me said, that's what most of us find. We actually revert to those big pictures, all those big answers, and we can't see the little particulars. In the next day, I thought of dozens and dozens of examples of loving kindness. And 2 or 3 things happened, and I went, that was a kindness I hadn't expected. Someone offered to mow our lawn. Unexpected kindness. And I kind of hadn't framed it or seen it. Now, in this area too, I need some help in going, okay, what are the small particulars of affliction and isolation that I've felt? So it's too easy to move on and to not learn the lessons. And the psalm tells us we need to stop and learn the lessons. And sometimes they've been in the workplace for me, occasionally in the family. I see it in the distant family, where divisions from a long time ago raise their head and create tremendous pain for individuals. Without going into the details, I've learnt to see the particulars. I want to encourage you to see God in the particulars, not to simply say, as rightly we can say, God is my shield. But here is a way in which I've discovered, only in hindsight, that God was a shield for me. When I collapsed on the kitchen floor and my wife was in Sydney, my daughter wasn't answering the phone, but my son-in-law was able to raise her and call the ambulance and get me to hospital. I was in affliction. I didn't know I was. I was out of it. But there was a kindness. There was a presence of God. I didn't know it at the time. In fact, I've only discovered some of the stories of how God was present in hindsight, when people tell me what happened to me when I went to hospital. Well, there you go. You've had that experience, haven't you? When you've not realised how tough things were, but you've discovered it later. So in my own life, in your life, it's in those particulars that we have those stories, and we have that testimony to be able to do what David does in Psalm 3, to live our lives and reflect on how God has brought life to us, how God has been a shield. When we thought everyone is against me, we've been able to reframe it as I felt everyone was against me, and I discovered God was there, a shield, a friend. David is faced eventually with the death of his son and laments. It's a short passage at the end of what the 2 Samuel reading. but it's a desperate and tragic lament. Hold that against Psalm 3 and find out what it means to live in that complex space. Now, for you, my brothers and sisters here, not in Israel, let me imagine that you were one of my poor, long-suffering theology classes. It's actually really lovely to imagine, because I'm trying to imagine just what the fees would be for this. Wow. Anyway, put that aside. If I was setting you the assessment task, I think this is what it would be. Bring to mind, you may have to work hard, but one of those times when you were facing affliction, when you felt that nobody cared, everybody was against you. Reflect on that and then ask, in the light of the psalm, what were your feelings then? And how do they feel now that you've survived that space? Not everyone does. You've been given the gift of that opportunity. What does it mean to see God present? What are the new understandings that you have in the light of your experience? You can submit your answers to the office sometime in the next week. You can email me if you've got my email address. Clive Watkins is watching online. It's there in New South Wales at the moment. So Clive, you've got my email address. You make sure you've got this to me by Friday, and I'll look forward to the grade that you gave me for the sermon as well, but that's another story. Put it in poetic form if that's what suits you. Put it in dance form if you need to move out in that way. Make it a song. But have a think about it. This is a non-compulsory piece of assessment, by the way. But the psalm lands reminding us that God is good, God is great, God is present, and God cares. But it doesn't always feel that way. We live in that space. Everyone is against me? Maybe. God is with me? Yep, that's what I'm grappling with. May not feel like it, but that's part of the reality. Now, this is a story that has highlighted possibly for some of us some painful stuff, but the fact that we're here and alive suggests that God has been at work. And next week we're going to look at Psalm 4, and we'll look a bit more at the sense of what happens in the midst of feeling like God is a long way off, a very long way from caring. Until then, have fun with the homework, and seriously, all correspondence will be entered into. I'm very happy for the office to give you my email address, and I'm happy to engage if I can in any way. So there we go. Let's pray. God, as you gave David insight through the times when he felt everyone is against me, help us also to learn to see you in our times of past distress, that we may more fully trust you in our present and future distress. Amen. Thank you.